Okay, so you may have heard the story about a teacher who stood before his class with a large empty jar. Basically, he fills this jar with a bunch of empty rocks and asks his students, is the jar full? And the reply was something like, of course, the jar is quite clearly full. But the teacher just smiles and then fills the jar with a bunch of pebbles and asks the same question, is the jar full now? At this point, it seems pretty clear that the jar is full. So the students replied, of course, the jar is now full. There's no way anything else is going to fit inside it. But the teacher continued to add sand and liquid into the jar before finally accepting that the jar was now full. So the point of this story is that the jar is meant to represent our life, and the things that we put inside the jar is basically how we spend our day. So if we put rocks into the jar, this is like the meaningful, the high priority tasks that we do, whereas the sand and the liquid and the smaller things like that are the more trivial and potentially even meaningless stuff that we do to fill our day. Now, if we put the sand and the water into the jar first, there'll be no room for the rocks or the pebbles. And the same is true of our lives. So if we spend all of our time doing small and insignificant and meaningless stuff, we won't have any time left to do the high priority and important things that we want to do. So whenever we're structuring our day, we want to focus on the 2 or 3 high priority, meaningful tasks that we want to get on with before we get down to doing the sort of tasks that represent the sand and the water. Now, this is something that I've called the jam jar theory for obvious reasons, and there's a bunch of reasons why this works so well. Firstly, it helps to eliminate context switching. So when our brain is basically focused on 1, 2, or 3 different high priority tasks, we're less likely to jump around onto different projects, tasks, and less meaningful things that we need to do. So essentially, our productivity skyrockets. In fact, one psychologist says that for every additional task or context that we switch between, we essentially have a drop of about 20 to 80% of our overall productivity. So if we're focused on just one task, we're going to be close to about 100% productive. But if we have just one additional context, if we have like 2 tasks that we're focusing on, then we're going to drop our overall productivity by at least 20%. And this just gets significantly worse the more context that we're switching between. The other great thing about having just 1, 2, or 3 daily priorities is that it helps us to enter this state of flow. In other words, if we just have like one thing to focus on, it's so much easier for us to like hone our attention on that one thing and to enter this state of like enhanced creativity, productivity, and things like that. And this is something that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. Like if you've ever lost track of time doing some research or writing an essay or just getting fully engrossed in a task, then you've probably entered this state of flow. Now, I won't lie, it's not actually that easy to enter the state of flow, but as long as we're not focusing on a task that's so easy that we get bored or so difficult that we get anxious, there's a good chance that we're going to enter this flow state. Now, what this jam jar story also tells us is that life isn't going to be fulfilling, fun, or enjoyable when we just focus on the rocks. Like, we need the sand and the water and the pebbles too. Like, if we're spending all of our time on high leverage activities like doing revision or writing essays or building a business, we're going to feel burnt out and stressed out pretty quickly. So we need to do stuff that we find enjoyable and relaxing too. So how do we design our day with this in mind? Well, this is where triple P time blocking comes in handy. Now, time blocking clearly isn't anything new. For example, Benjamin Franklin was a avid early adopter of the concept of time blocking, and he would structure his day so he knew exactly when he was going to eat, do his chores, and things like that. But it's also something that not many of us actually do, despite it being such a useful thing when it comes to time management. All we need to do then is to divide our day into individual chunks, with each chunk having a very specific task. So the difference between a to-do list and time blocking is that with time blocking, we're not only told what to do, but also when to do it. Now, the triple P part of triple P time blocking basically stands for the different sort of time blocks that I use to structure my day. Now, you don't have to use this method, but I find it particularly effective to manage my time effectively. So basically, we've got the power up time, we've got the productive play time, and we've got the protected time. So first, power up time. Now, this time block is always the first thing I have in my calendar. And as the name describes, it's basically a task or a group of tasks that allow me to sort of get into the right frame of mind and power me up for productive work. I know that if I just wake up, eat some breakfast, and dive straight into my work, I'm going to hate myself. So I always have some group of tasks that I'm going to do that's going to get me in the right state of mind for the day. So whether that's sort of doing some reading, or working on a personal project, or working on a side hustle. All of these different things are sort of fun, enjoyable things that allow me to sort of ramp up my productivity and get me ready for the day. This strategy very, very loosely takes advantage of Newton's first law, which tells us that objects in motion will stay in motion, while objects at rest will stay at rest. So once we get going and start ticking off some items on our to-do list, we find it much easier just to keep going and keep ticking off items throughout the day. Oh, and there's also this thing called the Zeigarnik effect, which basically tells us that once we start a task, we naturally feel compelled to continue with that task until it's finished. So the beauty of this is that if we start our day with something which is relatively simple and easy to do, then we're going to start building momentum, we're going to want to continue with that task until it's finished, and that positive momentum will carry on with us throughout the day. Okay, so the next time blocks are productive playtime. And the idea here is that we want to structure time in the day to do stuff which is a little less demanding, but still semi-productive, and sort of work around our natural flows in energy throughout the day. So we're kind of working around our natural circadian rhythm, where our energy sort of peaks during the morning and the early evening, and there's like a natural trough when it comes to the mid-afternoon and later in the evening too. So during these natural troughs throughout the day, we want to be using this time for our productive playtime. So this means things like going to the gym, or finishing off a chore, or reading a book and things like that. And occasionally it can mean socializing or partying or doing other sorts of heinous activities like that. That then leaves us with the protected time blocks, which are essentially just the rocks, the meaningful high priority items that I need to do each day, and they do take up the large percentage of my time. One thing I do try to keep in mind when adding these protected time blocks into my calendar is Parkinson's law, which tells us that a task will expand to fill the time available for it. So if I give myself 4 hours to complete an essay or to do some research or something instead of 2 hours, that task will inevitably take the full 4 hours. But if I gave myself just 2 hours to do that same task, I'd probably get it done in half the time. So as long as we're being realistic, we should always give ourselves slightly less time than we're fully comfortable with when it comes to completing a task. Now, the one big problem many people have when it comes to time blocking is that it just feels a little too rigid. Sometimes things do take a little longer than expected. Sometimes another task just pops out of nowhere and it sort of derails us, we don't know what to do, and everything just goes to shit after that. So what's really, really important when it comes to sort of managing our time is to build in flexibility into our system. You've probably heard the phrase, no plan survives contact with the enemy, and you know what? It's pretty true. However well we plan out our day, try to time block every waking hour, things just aren't going to work out how we expected. One of the big reasons for this is something known as the planning fallacy, first proposed by Daniel Kahneman in 1979, which basically tells us that we all tend to underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to complete a given task. In fact, even if it's a task that we've performed like a million times before, like writing an essay or preparing for a moot or cleaning the dishes, we all tend to lean onto the side of being overly optimistic about how long that thing's going to take and how well we're going to manage our time. So what's the solution to this? Well, my recommendation is to build a buffer. And all this really means is that instead of structuring our day such that all the time blocks are back to back, we should leave a little gap between each individual time block. So if something doesn't quite go to plan, that's totally okay because we've accounted for that with our individual buffers. So for instance, let's say that an essay takes me an extra 15 or 20 minutes to write. It's not a big deal because I've already built in the flexibility into my system to allow for things to overrun. The other thing to keep in mind when using this system is that if you finish a task early, there's no need to just keep ploughing on with your work and just moving on to the next time block before that time block has started. We can use that extra time that we have for finishing a task early to do something fun and to just chill out. In the worst case scenario where the buffer still isn't enough time for us to get our stuff done, it's really easy for us to get trapped in this mindset that we are not very productive or inefficient, but this is seriously a really bad mental model to have. We really shouldn't ever be tying our self-worth to actually completing a task. Instead, we should value making progress on the thing instead. Like, we're never going to feel totally happy, energetic and productive 24 hours of the day, so just be happy that you're sat down at your desk doing something. Finally, one of the things that we all seem to forget when it comes to time management is that it's not just about how we use our time in the short term, but actually about how we use our time in the long run. Like, if we have the perfect day one day, but then avoid anything that smells like work for the next 5 days, then that's going to be pretty pointless. This is why our plan is to encourage consistency and habit building. There's literally a bunch of different ways that we can do this, but my method is one of the easiest. It's called the X effect. The idea of the X effect is that it helps us to build a habit by encouraging us to mark an X for every day that we complete a given task. Like if we want to get better at reading or analysing the law or, I don't know, doing pretty much anything, for every day that we do that thing, we mark an X to represent that we've done it on a given day. The goal then is to build a long streak of X's and reward ourselves for consistency. So if I get 10 X's in a row for reading every single day for 10 days, then I can reward myself by getting a takeaway. And if I get 100 X's in a row, maybe I could reward myself by going on a holiday. It doesn't really matter how you reward yourself, but whatever you choose, make it something exciting, rewarding, and fulfilling. The bottom line is that it takes about 49 days or so for a new habit to form. So if we're consistently doing something over that time period and tracking our time, that thing will eventually become automatic. Like time management and the thing that we want to get good at and do consistently becomes an automated part of our life. It's basically a miracle. If the X effect sounds like something you'd find useful in your own life to manage your time and to build new habits, I've left the exact template I use in the description section below this video. So yeah, make sure you check it out and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.